We were candidly very honest. Anytime we didn't think that we could do a good job for the end customer, instead of trying to paint a vision of what the product will eventually be and have them be, I don't know what the opposite of an evangelist is, like somebody is a detractor and talks about how the product didn't live up to expectations. On the first call, we would say, unfortunately, I don't think we're the right fit for you, because we would get pushback of people saying like, but all these other things about your product are great. Like if you could just do this last thing, it would be perfect. That's hard to say no to as a founder, especially in the early days where each individual customer could be, plus 10% of your total revenue. But it was something that we knew we had to do.
Today's episode is about one of the most important things as a young company: focus, especially when you're getting pulled into a million different directions. Our guest today is Adit Abraham, the co-founder and CEO of Reducto, which turns documents into data. To date, Reducto has raised over 100 million from the likes of A16Z, Benchmark, First Round, and YC, partially because they were and still are incredible at focusing on what truly matters. With that, welcome Adit. It's wonderful to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So today's topic is an incredibly important one: ruthless prioritization as a founder. I think you guys did an incredible job at that at Reducto. So let's start with, right, early on, you applied to YC. When you applied with an idea that you knew you were going to actually pivot away from. And during that pivoting process, focus and prioritization was a constant theme. So can you tell us more about that time and how focus played a big part in you guys landing on what is Reducto now?
Even before we get to the points where I think we narrowed our focus to the level that we should have from the start, I can kind of talk about the frame of mind coming into this, which is both Ronak and I had tried companies before Reducto. And one of the first conversations that we had as a co-founder pair was talking through failures that we didn't want to repeat, like things that we felt we did a bad job of the first time. And the common theme really boiled down to, we wanted to do something immediately practical for our customers. Like we wanted to solve something that's people were trying to rip out of our hands, as opposed to just like broad visionary ideas that sounded cool in our heads, but we would be fighting against a wall to get out there. And the idea that I mentioned we got into YC with clearly became that visionary idea concept, and that we were, I think, the first team to release an API for long-term memory for language models. Which is a really fun idea. It went super viral on Twitter in this space where everybody wants to see the latest and greatest. And it was this canonical thing where you have the full calendar of meetings. You make a easily accessible calendar link, and so everybody's taking your time. But you hop on these calls, and this is in GPT 3.5 era. All the people that we would talk to were in very early stages of even considering an AI product. And so you'd ask them, hey, what is this going to solve for you? And they pretty much would never have an answer. It would be this esoteric idea of I know that long-term memory is a good thing to have, but it was never the case that people were saying, oh, our users are churning because we're not remembering their chat history. That just wasn't the bottleneck. And so we got into YC. We were very upfront with YC that, hey, we're not sure that now is the right time. Somebody would clearly do a good job at this eventually, but this period of time was not when it made sense to build this sort of company. But that left us with this free-form state of, okay, we're going to do the upcoming YC batch. And there are so many different things that we could do, and we just weren't sure what the right thing to do was. And the first version of Pivot Hell was we had this Google Doc of literally just a brain dump of everything we possibly could imagine ourselves doing. It was a mix of, things that we felt we were equipped to do just in terms of skill set, but also things that just seemed like good ideas out the box. Things that we actually didn't really care about. One of the craziest ones was we heard about how VCs needed to archive their iMessage communications. And so we were like, okay, we could do that. That seems buildable. And it was this loop where constantly, time after time, we would just go through quick sprints to see, whether it made sense to pursue something. And we were jumping around between such different spaces. Like sometimes it would be data labeling, sometimes it would be the species compliance thing and all that. That it didn't feel like we were building towards something. And we had this long-term memory products running in the background through all of it. But after a month or two of that, jarring back and forth, we decided to take a step back and really just look at it as what is the most tractable way to at least find one person's use case and understand that deeply. So very early on, we decided to just offer free consulting. Ronak, my co-founder, has been doing vision research since quite literally he was 13 years old. Like one of those people that published in high school as first author, all of that. And so we said like, hey, an hour of our time, no strings attached, like we'll just help you with any vision problems that you have. And one of the common pain points that came up there, we thought vision problems would be things like traditional CV, object detection of, I don't know, you're trying to detect fish in a fish farm and you want to be able to segment those out. What it actually was this was around when AI applications were starting to verticalize, and people would say, hey, I'm trying to parse patents, and these line numbers keep throwing off the model outputs. And like, I don't know, I'm dealing with financial statements and the tabular structures are really hard to get right, and it's throwing our end model outputs off. And that was interesting because one of the features that did actually resonate with the long-term memory product was that users would say, hey, you're managing the user's chat history. Can you also manage the files they've uploaded? And that was this weird thing where we'd put a ton of time into making that parsing work because it was surprisingly difficult. And we never considered selling that as its own product, but we decided to just on a whim put together a really simple Streamlit app that didn't have any of the other stuff. It was just document segmentation. And we wrote a technical blog on how we built our own approach to segmenting documents. And that ended up being the thing that really mattered. It was like a slap in the face of just that very pared down version, like a subset of the features that we were originally trying to sell. People immediately started replying with, hey, this is better than what I'm getting from Textract. Is this a hosted API? Like, can I pay by a Stripe? And it was just a lot of founders described the moments when they felt like they had an early version of product market fit. That common thread was the first time where I felt like, okay, this is what we should do instead.
So is it fair to say about the first version of what true focus looked like at Reducto? Was you guys saying you were just going to focus on computer vision as kind of a first initial problem, and we're going to see wherever that takes us? I think early on, one of the hardest things is to, because as you said, anything is possible at this stage, and there's so many fancy ideas out there. What were some of maybe the challenges, or what put you over the edge that you actually needed to just focus on one thing, even if it comes at the cost, right, of not doing a million amazing things that sound way fancier than what you were actually doing?
And this is something that I think a lot of first-time founders struggle with. Of every idea, if you're reasonably sensible, will have something compelling about it, but one layer deeper will always have some caveats that makes you not want to pursue it. Like if you are sitting in front of a whiteboard and you're brainstorming things that your startup could do, you'll probably have a million different things that sound like they could make money. And you'll spend 30 minutes researching it and you'll find that, oh, X company exists and it does exactly what the idea I'd listed out and thought nobody did does. And that one layer deep, I think, is the most dangerous place to be, because it's the easiest place to turn around and go to the next thing. And if you always get blocked at that first layer deep of, okay, maybe this isn't as clear cut as I thought, I feel like you end up going nowhere, and that's the worst form of go to hell. And so having something where we gave ourselves space to not, settle on any particular thing, like we were ready to adjust within the CV space based on what people were telling us, but a constrained focus that we decided we're going to go deeper here, and every point of feedback is going to take us deeper in this space as opposed to onto an adjacent space, is the only thing that made it possible to make progress. So like dig past that first layer into, okay, other things exist, but here are the things that we could do better than those other things.
Did you have to say no to a lot of interesting ideas that were too far away? And
yeah,
I'm sure
Sorry,
that wasn't easy at all. to do at that time?
Yeah, even within the CV restricted focus space, I remember we had signed a 5K contract with the YC company for something that was different. Like they wanted auto labeling. And maybe for some of the folks listening, 5K doesn't sound like a lot. As an early stage startup, it actually is a ton. Like it feels like a crazy amount to give up. But there's just there are a lot of things that can make money. There's a much smaller set of things that you want to build a company around. Um, and so as we were thinking about like what do we actually want to productize and go really far with, that auto labeling approach was not it. And so we decided to just void the contract and refund them for that like initial period. Um, and the thing that we ended up on, it wasn't just about the interest from the markets. It was also this broader idea of we really saw it as a thematic thing. We knew that clearly as these newer verticalized companies were coming out, that one of the biggest things that mattered was the context that they were providing the models. And we knew that this idea of being a layer that connects human context to artificial intelligence and makes it possible to reason on that effectively um, was something that we could imagine spending the next 10 years on because it really, really mattered. And so even once we landed on that, there were plenty of things we had to say no to, but leading up to that, a ton of things that we could have made money on, but I don't know if they would have been the same company we are today.
Which is a fantastic segue, right? Because connecting kind of human context to intelligence is a very big and broad and gigantic space. So again, you could have ended up in a place where you're now building a little bit of everything, yet you decided to once again, right, focus super hard early on and basically just be very good at one thing. We read what did that look like? And kind of what were some of the considerations that went into this continued very like strong focus, and how did also just being a very small team at the time play a role with that?
So one thing that I always comment on is this idea of document processing is probably one of the oldest spaces in tech. It's a multi-decade long problem. I know people that have worked on PDF processing from the 1990s, like longer than I've been alive. And obviously it's evolved over time in terms of what you can do and why you need to do it. But there is this idea of the space has existed. There are players that have been around for over a decade. And even the newer companies that were coming out in a similar framing of, unlocking data for language models. I think the follow-up to that is we weren't looking at this as we've uncovered something that nobody's ever thought to do. It was people have thought to do it, but maybe there's more that can be done. Or maybe there's like a subset of these problems that really, really matter. And so when we started, I remember we had a competitor that was really big on this idea of, human context for language models, but they said you could upload anything, any form of unstructured data to them, and they would parse it. And from day one, I think they supported something like 35 different file types. But a lot of the calls that we would do, and a lot of our early customers, were actually people that had already tried using that, and were churning because they actually didn't need 35 different file types. They had 2 or 3 that really mattered to them. And they weren't getting the accuracy within those 2 or 3 that they needed. And so when we really looked at it, we knew that we couldn't possibly, as a team of 2, be incredible at all 35 file types. We didn't even want to go down that direction of feature parity. All that really mattered is that for the things that we did do as a company, we were best in class. So there's filtering from 35 file types to 1, which is we wanted to do PDFs first. But even within PDFs are effectively like an image, a whiteboard that could contain any which way sort of information. Like you could have graphs, you could have floor plans, you could have tables, multi-columns, whatever it might be. And so restricting within PDFs, we decided that the first 2 things that we wanted to tackle is we wanted to have the best layout understanding and the best table understanding. So really small sub problems that you can see as a more abstract thing where, patients' records could be in a table, but also a financial statement could be in a table. And so it's this underlying issue that's would extend across different industries and would be incredibly important for us to build on top of. Um, and that was enough. Like we ended up landing a Fortune 10 contract, um, where the main thing that really stood out to them was we were parsing tables that their internal team was struggling with. We landed a bunch of customers in legal tech where, legal notoriously has all sorts of cases of multiple columns with line numbers. They have things like court discovery documents will be what we call a quadplex. It's like a 2x2 grid, where each section of the grid is a full page that you need to parse. And so just solving those two things was enough for these people to want to migrate their entire pipeline over. And from there, of course, we added more and more to the feature sets, but we just wanted to be incredible at those to start.
One of the things we see quite a bit with companies very early on is that, right, they'll talk to 30, 40, 50 customers and they'll get pulled into 3, 4, 5 different directions. They're all directionally kind of the same because it's a similar ICP and everything. But then they struggle with like, what are they exactly to whom? And it's very, very hard to say no to anything, especially if there's money on the other side of this. So if I was in the room like back in the day with you, or kind of a founder was in the room back in the day with you, just listening in to the discussions we had around prioritization, was it very clear from the beginning on that that's what you wanted to prioritize on? Or was it a bit of a longer process? And if it was a bit of a longer process, what were some of the things that helped you decide and give you comfort on, and maybe frameworks that you used to make these decisions at the time?
We were very intentional in only choosing to tackle problems that felt transferable, even if that meant saying no to otherwise good prospects. Um, like something like layouts is something that we knew that no matter what customer we talked to in the future, if they were processing PDFs, we would need to have good layout understanding. But one example of companies that we said no to for a long time is construction documents include things like blueprints and floor plans. And that was something where even though there's a ton of money to make in parsing construction documents, we knew that the work that we would do there wouldn't lead to us, landing an insurance company or something else. And especially when we were a team of two, it just didn't make sense to try to land that individual contract as opposed to try to build a product that would actually scale across customers. And so we were candidly very honest. Anytime we didn't think that we could do a good job for the end customer, instead of trying to paint a vision of what the product will eventually be and have them be, I don't know what the opposite of an evangelist is, like somebody is a detractor and talks about how the product didn't live up to expectations. On the first call, we would say, unfortunately, I don't think we're the right fit for you. And it's weird because we would get pushback of people saying like, but all these other things about your product are great. Like if you could just do this last thing, it would be perfect. That's hard to say no to as a founder, especially in the early days where each individual customer could be, plus 10% of your total revenue. But it was something that we knew we had to do.
Was that partially because it wasn't your first rodeo, or was it more, did you have people around you or things that you read that gave you their comfort? Because it is one of the hardest things that you can do at that stage as a company.
A mix of both. I think for both Ronik and I, on some level, our past startup efforts separately ended up becoming more like consulting projects. Like we went too deep into individual customers. And that was one of the things that's when we were talking about mistakes we didn't want to make again. We knew we'd messed up in the past. That made it a bit easier, but it definitely didn't make it like a clear-cut decision.
Especially probably nowadays, and I guess he started a little bit ago, but especially nowadays where everyone's deploying FDEs left and right, it's probably even harder because you can customize so much at scale as well. Maybe just to drill down a tiny bit more on the decision-making process, did you have any checklists or anything else around, like, and this isn't maybe not just in the early days, but then as a product started to evolve as well, did you have any checklists or decision criteria that helped you decide, right, when to actually expand the offering versus say no to potential customers? Because again, like, you continue to be very focused even as you grew the user and revenue base as well.
Honestly, I wish the answer was that we had this, spreadsheet and we would check off different boxes and that's how we made decisions. It really was more freeform than that. Veronica and I have been friends for a long time. And so I think we've always been in the camp of just having good discourse as founders. Like we can talk about ideas without it ever feeling personal if one person thinks it's a good idea and the other person doesn't. And we didn't make a hire until we were at like 800K in ARR. So all of those early customers where we were saying no, we just were talking between ourselves. So it's like, why is this or isn't it a good idea to pursue? And some things are the perfect balance of, doesn't take up too much of our time and also is clearly transferable to a bunch of people. Those are easy yeses. Some things are actually big investments, but are transferable. Like we see why it is compelling for us to do. Those are the harder conversations to have.
Was it a hard, because you guys are a horizontal product, but there are industry specific asks and nuances like the construction one you mentioned. Is that a hard trade-off that you ran in quite a bit early on, or was that, again, given the more narrow focus on just PDFs and certain layouts, an easier one?
I think the way that we've tried to approach this problem is a bit different from how many would approach it. And the second case leads to people needing to verticalize more. Because at the end of the day, even with something like a tabular structure, there are two ways that you could view it. One might be that you come across a customer with the financial statements and like you see the records of transactions or account holdings, and you decide it's like, okay, this is what a table looks like. Like I need to be looking at things like the grid lines to figure out how to parse a table. But not every table is going to have grid lines. Something might be, free form listed out on a grid. Like that's what we see in insurance a lot. What we look at tables as is you have two dimensions of data that could be associated any which way, but there's order in the way that a table is constructed. Even if you don't have grid lines, there's clearly like a structure to which there are spaces in between pieces of text that associates like this is one column versus another. And that's the same problem, just from a different lens, viewed much more horizontally. And so if you look at it less of how do I detect the grid lines separating the rows and columns, and more as how do I interpret structure when there might not be clear structure, suddenly that same thing becomes a lot more transferable. And we find cases where us trying to be resilient to faxes in healthcare, where the document might be rotated, leads to us being better at insurance and finance and all of that. And similarly, with the visual contents, instead of going deep on, how do we parse individual floor plans, we looked at it as how do we use vision language models, which are very good at unstructured image reasoning, to combat that last mile. Like maybe we can have a multi-step process to classify the type of image we're looking at and have dedicated pipelines for each of those. That is much more scalable and transferable.
Which is interesting, right? Because you almost have to relearn how you approach things from the much more deterministic way like software was built in the past and now the probabilistic way it is built now, and where generalization actually is like solving a more general problem and then applying it is much more impactful than solving for a very specific problem, then try to retrofit it to something else.
Yep, I agree.
Now, right early on, you told me kind of you started to build a small team, and you ended up in this place where, you had like you try to come up with priorities for people. You started having like 8 to 10 items on engineers' to-do lists and everything, and it was just incredibly hard to actually stay on top of everything because you guys had an incredible influx of customers and everything else. It was incredibly hard to stay on top of everything as a small team. So going back to focus and prioritization, like what did you guys do at that point, and how did that impact how you ran the company at the time?
Just to kind of set the stage, this is when we were 4 people total, including me and my co-founder. And we were probably at a few dozen customers, somewhere in that range. We'd done what we could to filter, as in we didn't have self-serve. We were actually choosing the customers to onboard, all of that. But still, like it felt like things were growing quite quickly. And there were just so many things that you need to do to keep customers happy. Like you can say no on the first call if this isn't what we do, but if you solve 95% of the problem, there's still going to be that last mile that they care about that you ideally do want to fix for them. And the thing that ended up being really chaotic is I'm a very big advocate of the minimal amounts of process needed for each phase of the company. So in the beginning, I remember I would push back even on us using Notion. And I think Notion is a great product, but I just didn't want us thinking about like, oh, how are we templating this document? It's like all we needed was a bullet point list of here are the things we're going to do. And so it was just like a really simple Google Doc, nothing fancy to it. So it was a person's name and the list of items that they would focus on for the week. We'd meet once a week as a team. And obviously we were sitting next to each other throughout that period. And we would just review how we were tracking on our bullet point lists. But when each person has 8, 10 different things that they're trying to do, it just becomes really chaotic where, you have different senses of priorities. You have things that feel really urgent because a bigger customer mentioned it, and suddenly you derail other things that were really important. So we were having these Friday meetings and it was like, oh, like we said we would do these 10 things. We got 3 of them done. The next 7 will roll over. But the new things come up that week. And so now you have 14 things to do. And you're like, okay, like we'll roll over these items. And it just became obvious that some of these rollover items we just weren't ready to commit to. And so it didn't make sense to pretend that we were. Like it wasn't going to be a real to-do item. Like it just didn't matter. Like we needed to make a conscious acknowledgement of we're not doing this right now. And we needed to have a clear sense of what we did really, really care about getting done. So that there was nothing ambiguous about it. So what we ended up doing was we decided to cut all of that. And for a period, we said every person only has one key priority for the week. And there might be other things that come up, small tickets that the person takes care of. But it's an issue if the one key priority didn't hit the milestone that mattered. And that was like the one thing that we put in the Google Doc. Week after week, it would be one item for each person. And that's when I think we really got to the points where it felt like even though the team was growing, that we still had the velocity that we did early on, because it wasn't about communication and prioritization problems. It was like everybody knew where the company needed to go. And the work was really the thing that mattered.
Did you ever, because having one priority means that's what you're held accountable to. And if you hire the right people, they'll still get, they work as owners, not as employees. So they'll still get the other things done. They're self-motivated. But did you run into any issues at all with regard to smaller things that weren't getting done that annoy customers? Or was it really just because you end up hiring like super well as well, that was less of a problem, despite the just focus on one thing?
And imagine that being harder if we didn't get as lucky with our early hires as we did. Fortunately, we didn't have to deal with that. Like people just knew what was important for the company.
It's also, and we talk about this a lot, right? That's one of the clear advantages of having everyone in person in the same room, because it's much harder to do when you're a remote business.
Yeah. And the second side of that, if I can jump in real quick, is in addition to all being in the same room, we from the beginning would set up Slack channels that everybody at the company was part of. So that it wasn't like I remember a thing that I had whiplash for coming out of Google was part of my job when I was a PM almost felt like a treatment for organizational inefficiency. Like it felt like part of my job was cemented because I was the only person with context. Like I was the only person attending some meeting. And so my job mattered because otherwise people wouldn't know why something needs to happen, which is silly. Like that shouldn't be the case. And it was really helpful from the beginning for it to be clear that every single person had deep customer intuition. Like when they released a feature, they were actually sending it directly to the customers themselves. So that if it went well, like the end customer would just directly reply to the engineer and say like, thanks, Erica, like this fixed, X sort of issue for me. And that way Erica has a clear understanding of what the person is looking for. But also if it went poorly, like they would tag somebody like Erica or Sid and say, hey, like here are the edge cases that I'm still struggling with. And so they just know, and it's not like we're assigning linear tickets and hoping that they get the depth of what really matters.
Now, about prioritization, and I think that's a theme in general throughout your journey and having a lot of focus, it does mean you have to say no to customers quite a bit. What did you learn, maybe for anyone listening, because it's one of the hardest things to do is to say no. None of us like saying no. What did you learn about saying no to specific customers, especially early on, and how to best not upset them in a way where they're not going to come back later on?
I remember one of the most transformative sales coaching adjacent things that I ever saw is the founder of Vendor gave a talk at YC, and he framed it as your job as a salesperson is to be almost like a doctor, where a patient is coming to you with problems and they trust what you're saying. And that was, as somebody who doesn't come from a sales background, not intuitive. I know that this is common advice, but if you think of sales from that framing, and you're coming into your customer calls as more of a consultant of sorts, as opposed to somebody that's begging somebody to take something that they shouldn't. I actually think your end customers pick up on that too. Where for the people that we said no to, it wasn't like a disrespectful, no, I don't care about your problem. It was more so just like I actually don't think that we can solve it for you. Here are pointers to what we would try. And many of those people ended up becoming customers in the future, as we sort of talk more, because some of those things they were willing to accept were not going to be part of the platform on day one. It's also interesting in cases where one of the main advantages of Reducto is that it works well out of the box for any sort of documents that you're dealing with. I remember I had a sales call with a VP of engineering at a Series C company. And this guy had rescheduled the call many times. It was like an intro from their CEO. The VP of engineering clearly didn't really want to be in the call. And I was asking him about his situation, and he presented as something that was mainly okay. And I basically said like, oh, like it sounds like, you're okay. I don't want to shove something down your throats. Like you probably don't really need Reducto. And a while later, when I got dinner with him, he was like, that was actually almost like a weird jolt where I was like, hold on, like you're supposed to be here to convince me. Like, what are you doing? And he, in that situation, like suddenly flipped it around and started talking about all the reasons why they could actually use Reducto and why it would be a benefit, because today they were processing 4 types of documents, but actually there were 30-ish that they were interested in doing and they just hadn't. And it became a collaborative process, and they're still a customer to this day. Even now, like as we have AEs on board and it's not just founder-led sales, we try to maintain that, where in the best case scenario, it's not that the customer is, going out of their way to make a purchase because somebody talks smoothly. It really is like we will offload some set of problems that you really care about, and we'll only do it if we think we can do it for you.
The power of actually solving a real problem, plus ultimately, in the end, right, I think about the rejection, we're all human beings and we don't like to be rejected. And that can completely shift a conversation as well.
I think this is one of those things to the first question that you asked of how do you become okay with this as a founder? The short answer is I think you just need to be able to zoom out a bit, because in the longer term, you see why it's healthy for the company to not onboard these customers. If you're stubborn, you may decide to ignore this advice that you've probably heard again and again. And you will regret it. Like you'll end up having to fire those customers in time because they're clearly unhappy with your products because you told them to do something it doesn't. You can learn that way, or you can just decide to have like a mutually respectful relationship with your prospects.
We actually celebrate with the founders that we back when they fire their first customer, because that typically means they have a much better understanding of who they are now. Versus earlier on, they took on too many. Now, right, to kind of get back to focus and decision making. So you guys you said 4 people right around the time you raised the Series A. You then started hiring up to about 20 employees. How did that impact? Right, you were all in the same room, one to-do list, one priority. How did that change after you grew the team to kind of 20 plus employees?
It's hard. So what I said earlier, if we got really lucky with our early employees, I think we've been really lucky with our first 20, where a lot of the people that we hired are in the category of former founder-esque people, that are really high agency, willing to do whatever the company needs, that are super scrappy with resolving customer issues, all of that. But no matter how good individual people are, as headcount scales, I think you need some amounts of process, and that's something I didn't want to admit at first. Like the idea of a Google Doc and everybody only has one priority doesn't scale. Um, you have projects that take a longer time, and so it doesn't make sense to measure every single project on a weekly cadence. Like you need sub items, and you need to plan out what those sub items are going to be. Um, you start building different product lines, and it's not just we are incredible at parsing. Suddenly, it needs to be the case that we're incredible at parsing and structured extraction, splitting, and classification, all these sorts of things. And everything about, oh, we're going to have everybody join every single Slack channel. Sure, you can still do that. But if people are in hundreds of Slack channels, they're probably not getting intimately familiar with every single one. Like it just doesn't work across all that. And so we do have more process today than we used to. I think we are, for a company at our stage, like Series B-ish, still less process heavy than most. We have functional meetings. So like the ML engineering team will meet together once a week. Product team will meet once a week, so on. Everybody's still in person, so there's just a very clear line of communication. But the big thing that we added is now every time we do a Friday all hands, it's an hour and a half. And the very first thing that starts with is 10 minutes on customer context. It is us reviewing as a team, like, what are people happy about? What are they upset about? What needs to be better? All those sorts of things. It's like sales saying what they're hearing in sales calls. It's engineers saying like what they're seeing a lot of support tickets for. It's really collaborative. And we do that before any sort of updates or anything like that, because you can feel a visceral reaction if you start the meeting with everybody is upset about latency and then none of our updates touch on latency. Like it's just a clear, like something is wrong, like we need to course correct, and everybody's on the same page about that. And so it becomes this like joint recollecting moments that I think is really important and will continue to be really important as we go from 20 to 40 or more.
Surfacing positive customer feedback is easy. Surfacing negative customer feedback is harder, especially in an organization that grows and an organization that needs to perform. Any insights kind of for other founders around, maybe even more so on the culture side, around building an organization where people lean into the negative customer feedback so actually get better as quickly as possible?
I generally think that the way that we have tried to frame Reducto is we tell a lot of our customers that we will be your ingestion team. Like we will be an extension of your own capacity for the set of problems that you want solved. And to that end, a lot of the negative feedback, no matter how it's expressed, isn't like a personal attack. It is guidance on what they, feel is missed. And every time we review these negative scenarios, it's not like person A clearly messed up here because customer is angry at what they did. It is like, as a team, we know we can do better. Like we shouldn't have issues like this. The one thing that we will never compromise on is offering really good customer support. Like it should never be the case that customers feel like they're screaming into a void. Like that is something that we are very hands-on for. But things like, oh, product could be better in X way. Like I ran into X issue. That's very tractable. Like that is just a pointer for what we need to do next. And we try to make that not personal as much as possible so that people feel okay with sharing these things. Because it ultimately is a team problem. Like it's an issue once the customer churns. Unfortunately, we've never had an enterprise customer churn to date in the history of the company. And part of that is that we are proactive about addressing these things that they end up being upset about or having issues with.
How do you go about, right now that you're a bigger company and you share a lot of the customer sentiment and everything, how do you go about prioritization now and deciding what to build versus, again, when to say no to things that you get pulled into?
We newly have started thinking through a bit more in terms of broader milestones. Like we have an announcement in October. And so we took the time to write out what needs to be true 6 weeks from today for us to feel like we are prepped for that announcement. And a lot of that is a combination of the customer context that we have. It's a combination of things that we know we will need if we want to land folks in our pipeline for net new contracts. And it really is honestly still a discussion. Like we don't do things based on like a point system or something like that. I think in a world where developments becomes easier, as like the cost of actually building a feature becomes lighter over time, it does become really important for you to have a qualitative judgment on what matters, like what the core things people are asking for is. Um, and that isn't like it's not a clear cut thing of what is and isn't a priority. It really is like a deep understanding of how much does the customer care.
Or what I found interesting is you said when you do kind of a weekly planning now, you partially assign work based on kind of excitement and strength amongst people. Maybe you walk us through how you do that prioritization at the individual level nowadays.
So oftentimes I will come into the meeting with some set of broader priorities. And as soon as we end the meeting, you will see people like cluster with follow-up discussions. Like I'll see my co-founder and like one of the software engineers talking about the editing endpoints. And they will, like immediately start whiteboarding for things that came to mind in the meeting that they didn't want to derail the group discussion with. And my co-founder is very good at having a good sense or like a pulse of what people are excited by. We each, for all of our direct reports, do a once a month one-on-one that isn't tactical. Like it's not about individual projects. It's more so, what do you feel most energized by? Like, what is the work that you enjoyed in the last month? What is the work that didn't feel like the right fit? And it's never going to be the case that people only work on things that are, purely fun. But we've just found that the better you can align to what people are excited to do, the farther they will go with that thing. Like there's just a difference between people trying to hit a milestone versus people that wants to see things through to 110%.
There's nothing more powerful than people being intrinsically motivated, or it's one of the most powerful things.
For sure.
Now, the kind of last focus specific topic that I want to touch upon is, right, your focus is also reflected in how you spent the quite significant amount of dollars that you've raised. Can you tell us more about that? Because you've spent very little to date as a company.
As of when this interview goes live, we will have raised something like 108 million, and we, in the lifetime of the company, will have spent somewhere around $1 million.
Which are incredible numbers.
Yeah, I think especially in the AI space, it's not common to burn that little. It wasn't like an aversion to spending money in and of itself. I see VC dollars as a tool that a company can leverage, but I also see it as a proxy for focus. And there's one side of things. There are plenty of successful companies that from day one, as soon as they've raised, have gone immediately in the camp of how do we spend this aggressively to scale incredibly quickly, all of that. And maybe that's growing the sales team, maybe that's paid ads, maybe that's subsidizing inference, whatever it could be as a dollars to growth conversion. The thing that was really important to us, going back to even the founding framing, is we were very much on this page that the company doesn't have a right to exist if it is not meaningfully advancing in some capacity the status quo for this multi-decade-old industry. Like, even if there is a 10 million ARR opportunity in being no better than everyone else, that's just not interesting. Like, it's not something that actualizes the mission of what we set out to do. And so we didn't want to be in a camp of throwing VC dollars at some growth targets, at least initially, because that wasn't the core thing that mattered. The very first thing that we cared about is, are we the best in class product? Like, we wanted to build the state of the art for the core set of problems we cared about. And that translated to everything just operating at a slightly different cadence. We were very intentional with the hires that we made. The first research hire that we made did his entire PhD on vision models for document processing. I'm not exaggerating when I say, like, as far as domain expertise goes, he's probably one of the 10 best people in the world.
That's quite the fit. That's quite the fit right there.
It's a really rare fit. Like, I know of competitive companies that are built on top of open source projects he built on the side with his PhD. Like, he just published things. And that's a fraction of the work that he's done. And so we spent months convincing just him individually to get on a call with us. And once we got on a call and had a great initial call, we booked flights to Indiana where he was doing his PhD just to spend the whole day with him. And there's a world where we actually just threw money at the problem and decided, okay, we need research capacity and we will arbitrarily pay and it's like hire whoever comes through the door. That seems good. And maybe that would have worked too, but it just wasn't the style that we wanted. It's like we wanted our first research hire to be this person that builds alongside us. And that applies to how we grew the sales team, all of that as well.
Once you have the money, unfortunately, it's very hard not to spend it for most people. And a lot of people spend it on things that aren't right. All of a sudden, your fourth, fifth, and sixth priority also becomes something you throw a lot of money at. It's amazing for you guys. One of the things that stuck with me as well is that you said early on, right, is that your priority was being the best, or you see dollars spent as a proxy for priorities, and your priority was to be the best product in market. So you spent heavily on data labeling, for example, but you ran very few experiments outside of that. Maybe also right, because a lot of founders early on run a lot of experiments and everything. They said the more money you have, the more you throw at these experiments. Are there any kind of experiments or examples of experiments that you guys thought about that you actually decided not to do because you were so laser focused on just that one thing?
Yeah. And again, it wasn't a dollars thing there. It was a time thing. It's exactly like what you mentioned. At some point, we had more data labelers that we were paying than full-time employees at the company because in order for our models to be incredible, we needed incredible data. And so we went really deep on that. We have never in the lifetime of the company thought of an experiment or like a model direction, anything like that, that we said no to on the basis of, oh, that costs too much. Like if we think something will be meaningfully helpful for our customers, we're not compute restrained in that sense. Like we don't restrict ML engineers on GPU hours. What does matter is that ML engineer's focus can only be allocated to so many different things. And so it's really important that every training run that they're doing is something that we think has the potential to substantially move the products for the things that we care about. That's what I mean as like restricting down the set of experiments. And obviously, as the team grows, like as our product line has grown, and now we are investing a lot into scaling go-to-markets and all that, the set of experiments that we are doing is growing. But it's still that same framing of we don't want to experiment for the sake of it. We want to be thoughtful about the things that are worth putting our time and energy towards.
I think you put it well when we last chatted, which is you said, right, VC money is mainly rocket fuel for the things that work versus experimentation money.
I think that there is a time when you want to really, really throw it at, the things that are important for the company. But I personally am in the camp of thinking that I've seen plenty of cases, just anecdotally, where it becomes a distraction of sorts, where people feel the need to spend it for the sake of spending it. Like they just have a mental model of this should only last for 3 years. Like that's the right way to think about funding rounds. And that didn't feel right to us.
The other thing that I've also heard is, but if you raise a bunch of money early on at pretty high terms, the bar for what you need to clear for the next round becomes so high that it's much harder, at least psychologically, to experiment at a small scale, because you almost have to take big swings every single time because they have to work to get there. So that's the other kind of failure mode that I see quite a bit in terms of companies just spending money on things that end up not working out.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I don't mean to say any of this to suggest that we haven't been ambitious in how quickly we want to grow. Like despite the team size and all of that, I can't name all of them, but we are working with what I consider to be many of the best logos possible for a company our stage. Like really, really large enterprises, but also a lot of the leading AI native companies. But I'm in the camp of thinking that if you zoom out and you think about what version of this company becomes a billion ARR company, ultimately the like early days of revenue on some level round to zero. Like the first million in ARR in the broader context of the company, just is not the reason why the company exists. It's more so a proxy to, are more and more people finding your product valuable? Are they finding it valuable enough to pay a non-trivial dollar amounts for it? And those things have always been true. And we've been lucky to work with investors. And before we take any sort of investments, to align and make sure that we are on the same page about, it's like, what is the real thing that we're trying to get at? Because it's not absolute dollars. It is directionally, are we on track to be that billionaire or a company? And at least so far, we've always hit that trajectory.
Partially why I was so excited to have this conversation is because you're an incredible example of focus and saying no to things in order to move even faster on the things that you're focusing on. You guys did a lot of things right along this journey, but kind of knowing what you know now and looking back, what are things that you would do differently earlier on if you were to do it all over again?
I talked about this in a conversation recently. For me, and also probably for most early stage founders, I think on some level, you actually have a very good understanding of what the right thing to do is. But there is a level of complexity that people think they need in company building, because company building is this esoteric concept that is marketed as, really hard and really complex. And you hear about critical strategy decisions that make you want to sit down and spend all of your time planning. But most pursuits in any domain boil down to really, really fundamental things that are really obvious. And the analogy that I always like to use is, if you went to a personal trainer and you said, hey, like, I want to get more fit, or even like a world-class bodybuilder, the advice that they would give you is really, really simple and mundane. Like, they would tell you to get enough sleep, they would tell you to eat enough protein, and they would tell you to be consistent about going to the gym. And that's like 90% of it. They wouldn't give you this whole supplement stack. They wouldn't hyper optimize your routine or anything like that. And it's the same thing with company building, where I remember during YC, we would go to these talks with really, really incredible founders. And the founders' talks would be very pragmatic. Like, they would be talking about the very early days and how they listened to customers, and why, like, going really deep on listening to customers actually led to the key product insights, of how they focused on like a very small subset of their product features. And those subsets ended up being the most important thing that helped them scale. And then you listen to the audience questions, including myself. And the questions always go into this lens of like trying to complicate things more. Like, they want the speaker to give some crazy insights, that I'm sure they have a ton of insights, but it's not what generalizes to a different founder's context. And so, yeah, a long way of saying, I wish I could have distilled that idea in myself earlier on, of just focus on the fundamentals of, you need to have a great product, you need to be really close to your customers. Everything like fundraising, et cetera, follows downstream of doing those two things really, really well.
It's very well put, right? We're all kind of always looking for that magic bullet that makes things easier, but there's no substitute to just doing hard focused work every single day. And it takes a long time, but it compounds over time.
For sure.
So a couple quick closing questions before we end. More is curious to hear, what popular advice that is often given to founders do you disagree with, and why?
I don't want to say that I disagree with this advice. I want to more so say that there are phases where the advice applies and doesn't. There's a lot of advice in the early days around this idea of being scrappy, that is incredibly true for the 0 to 1 phase, that doesn't always translate. And we've made plenty of mistakes of, this whole podcast has been talking about how we were intentional with, recruiting slowly and all of that. But also, there are phases where you just need more people on the team and you need to go faster. And it's not the right decision to be as slow with hiring. Companies accelerate on the order of weeks or days, not on the order of years, especially in the early days. The only thing that I would say is, the canonical advice of, have a really lean team, all of that is true, but it's important to make sure that it's true in the context of the problems that you face today.
Now, to flip that around, if someone's thinking about starting your company or has just started one, what's the one thing or piece of advice you'd give them?
One is go full time. Even if you don't know exactly what things will look like yet. I think that there's something very, very important. It's really easy to lie to yourself and say you're going to work on something on the side. And this isn't an attack on work ethic. It's more so that in the early days, there's a difference between, even if you have 10 hours of work, a difference between having 50 hours on your day job and 10 hours that you spend towards a startup, and having 10 hours that you're spending towards a startup and 60 hours of free space where you feel like you should be doing more on your startup. And that open space ends up being really important. And that's given enough time, like you're going to try different things than you would have if you actually constrained yourself to 10 hours. That's the first thing. Like definitely go full time as soon as you're sure this is something you want to do. And the second thing is, of all the things that you could be doing, there are probably only one or two things that really matter, along the lines of build a great product and make sure that people resonate with that product. I often find that the first sets of questions that people considering starting a company ask me is more so on the side of like what would get VCs interested, and like fundraising and all that. And fundraising is important to the sense of you don't want to be making bad decisions because you're constrained by money. Like you don't want to be in a position where you can't go full time because you need pre-seed funding. Obviously solve that problem. But past that, like a seed round follows a great business. You shouldn't try to put one before the other.
Speaking of VCs, last question, because as a VC myself, I'm always curious. What's the most impactful or thoughtful thing a VC has done for you or your business that you've been involved with to date?
I've said this in another podcast. I'm a really big evangelist of how helpful Liz, our seed round investor, has been from the start of the company. We've received a ton of help across the board from all of our investors, but I won't go into depth here, but there's a conversation I remember having where Liz said the most founder-friendly answer possible, and it really changed the nature of our relationship. I don't even know if she knows this or has thought of it in that sense. I think every VC frames things as founder-friendly, and to some extent, it's easy to be founder-friendly when it's one-to-one. But it was the first time where it felt like no matter what, Liz was going to support the company and be there for the company and be there for us as founders in this process of building the company, such that it meant I felt comfortable going to her with not just the good news, but also the bad news. Like there's something scary in the beginning about going to VC and saying like, shoot, I think this customer is going to churn. Like, what do I do? Because you almost don't want to suggest that there are things that could be going wrong. And I think she did a really good job of making it clear that like that's not what our relationship needed to look like.
This is a fantastic way to end. Thank you so much for coming on. This is amazing. Really appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me. This is fun.